we have Adam Gilbert on here tonight, and then this is going to be kind of a treat because we frankly don't cover this topic very often. We're going to talk about commercial real estate investing, and he is with a firm called The Firm Commercial. So definitely check that out. Is there any other places they should be reaching out to you or looking you up?
You could definitely find me all over social media, Facebook, Instagram. Most of it is going to be at Adam Gilbert 13. So Twitter, Instagram, all of them. Follow me anywhere you want, except TikTok.
Yeah.
I don't do TikTok.
I still don't understand TikTok. I've had so many people tell me I need to do TikTok, especially for the podcast, but
It's
I frankly,
amazing. I
I don't
consume
get
the
it.
content, but it's really hard to make. I just it's past my skill set. But if you want to
Yeah.
consume some great content, TikTok is where it's
Yeah. That and
at.
Clubhouse. I keep getting people
hmm
telling me about Clubhouse, and I have an invite to Clubhouse, but I have yet to really do anything with it.
I
But
feel that's waning in popularity a little bit. I think it had its heyday, and I think it had its moment.
well, I think it's because a lot of other applications and platforms are adding that functionality in now,
Right.
even Discord. I mean,
hmm
it's everywhere.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's jump into this. Like, how did you get into this? I mean, I know that you started off in a law firm, right?
Correct. Yeah, I'm a lawyer by trade, and in California, you can just, if you're an attorney, you could just kind of sit for the broker's exam. Um, and so I just kind of did that on a whim just to have an extra license and started doing deals on the side. And then next thing I know, I'm stopped practicing law and I'm doing real estate full time. So, I mean, most of the stuff that I do doesn't require my background. It definitely helps, but doesn't require, any specific legal knowledge.
Sure. So, and commercial properties is kind of, frankly, it's a pretty big aspect of real estate investing, but it's almost kind of a niche. I mean, a lot of the people that I talk to, they always start off with wholesaling single family homes, eventually move into multifamily. But this commercial property is kind of out there somewhere. It's on our radar, but it's almost as if we're a little scared of it.
Yeah, definitely. That was always interesting to me. Every time I go to a new city, I just like look at all of the commercial buildings and I'm like, wow, like someone or some entity like owns every single one of these. And so it's like we're surrounded by it. Every time we go out, like commercial real estate is all around us. But yeah, it is kind of kept in the dark a little bit. But the way commercial real estate investing is set up is so favorable to the investor. It's just absolutely incredible in terms of tax savings and the way that you can refinance and take money out of properties. It really is incredible. So even a lot of residential real estate agents who they're like, oh, I don't do commercial. I'm like, it's pretty much the same thing. It's a building, but it's really just about coming up with that understanding of some of the basic principles to really wrap your head around it.
Sure. Well, what would be some of those differences in the benefits of commercial over residential?
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea behind residential is that everyone needs a place to live.
Right.
Commercial, it's a little bit different in that you don't necessarily need a place to do your business, but so many people want it. And so some of the benefits of commercial real estate specifically is the way that it's financed and the way that valuations are done. So the financing structure is all based on the amount of income that comes into the property. So if I buy a property that has no tenants and not making any money, it's worth this much. As soon as I sign a couple of leases and have more income that I can show a bank, hey, I have these tenants coming in, it's worth this much. And so just using the refinancing structure that so many people are familiar with residential real estate, you're able to very quickly create a lot of value, do a refinance, take that money out, and then either use those funds to go back into the building or invest in other buildings. So it allows you to really ramp up your real estate investing career pretty quickly. However, the numbers are bigger and the risk is bigger because you need to make sure that you have an asset that will be rented. Because if you don't
Sure.
have any tenants, there goes your asset.
Well, I think one of those things that's on the top of everybody's mind right now is COVID. How has that impacted commercial properties over residential? I mean, it seems like residential has kind of come back in a pretty strongly all of a sudden. But a lot of the small business owners I've heard of, there's a lot of them who are they're deciding to start to just let their employees stay working from home. It's been working out pretty well. I mean, that's probably not going to be the case for storefronts, but some of the other
Mhm.
commercial properties might be the case. Is there seem to be an impact there?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the really interesting thing is that depending on your location and depending on the timing, there's so many different asset classes within commercial. There's hospitality, hotels, there's industrial roll-up door office, industrial space. There's office buildings, there's retail shopping centers, there's assisted living facilities and medical, right? And so depending on what's going on, you have to look to different asset classes. I always like when people say something's dead, I go into that asset class because there's not as much competition. So right now, post COVID, everyone's talking about, oh, office is dead. People will never go back. So guess what? The valuation of office buildings are at an all-time low. My
Mhm.
assumption is that we're going to get sick of working from home at some point within the next two
Yeah,
to 3 years. We're like, screw this, I'm going back to the office. And so if you can buy these office buildings when no one wants them, and then hold on to it for long enough, I think that you're going to have a really nice asset in the future if you can get those tenants back in there.
sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, so one of the other things that I think is interesting regarding commercial properties is that the way things are leased out is so different than residential. Let's
Mhm.
delve into that a little bit. Like, how is that different?
Yeah, so it's different in a couple of ways. So first and foremost, and I'm speaking from my knowledge of California, right? California is a very tenant protected state in terms of residential properties. It's very hard to evict someone, even if they're not paying rent. You have to go through all of these loopholes and
Mhm.
make sure every single T is crossed and I is dotted because they want to protect people. They don't want people kicked out of their homes. Commercial is completely different. It's a business. And usually, you're getting a personal guarantee from someone who's running that business that they're going to pay the rent, right? So there are still some protections, but much less so because again, if you lose your business lease, the government is less inclined to protect you as opposed to being homeless, right?
Right.
And the amounts of these leases are crazy. Like you sign a restaurant for a certain amount. We're talking multiple hundred thousands, $1 million leases like all the time, right? And that's why
Mhm.
these commercial properties become so valuable. You tie that to a personal guarantee and these people's houses, they're going to be inclined to stay into the property, or else you can go after them personally. So there's a lot of teeth that you can use, and you don't want to you want to work with people, but there's a lot of power in the ability to make sure that these people fulfill on their leases.
Right. Yeah. So, I'm in Minnesota, North Dakota, and some of that stuff that we kind of take for granted when it comes to residential, it's interesting what you can essentially have the store owner or whatever the commercial property pay for that you likely wouldn't have gotten away with in a residential property. I was trying to think of some examples, but it's almost like I think there was somebody locally that was renting out space for a restaurant, and they even had included like leases on all of the equipment, the
Mhm.
restaurant equipment and some of that stuff, that the contents of the actual facility as well.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's one of the things. So the cool thing from being a commercial property investor is that usually you have the shell of the building and then you're renting the individual suites to other people. So if, Adam, want to come in and start a restaurant business, I'm responsible for doing the build out on the inside of that restaurant.
Right.
You, Mr. Landlord, might give me a tenant improvement allowance, a portion of that to help because you are improving my building, but it's only going to be a portion. And so you have people coming in and they have a concept for a nightclub or a cigar lounge. They come and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on this build out. If they fail in their business and their lease, not only do you have the rights for the total amount of the lease until you rent it out, but if they do fail, well, they've improved your building, and now you can take this improved building that they have and lease it out to someone else at a much higher rate. And so, when someone's improving your property, which doesn't happen in residential, residential tenants want to fix as little as possible. Hey, our light bulb's out, will you come replace it? They're investing a lot of money, and the landlord gets the benefit of that investment.
Right. Right. So, one of the specializations that I understand that you do is, in residential, I'm very familiar with this regarding being able to add value to a property in some way. But you found a way to do that through zoning.
Yeah. So, and I've done this now for a couple of projects, both on the residential and commercial side. And so, a lot of times you'll drive through your town and you'll see that building, and you're like, why hasn't anyone done anything with that for like 20 years, right? It's either just a piece of dirt or the building's falling apart, right? And it's like in the middle. What's wrong with it? Why hasn't someone done something? And usually what the case is, I've found, is that the zoning is off, right? And so when you can't do the intended use or the best and highest use, someone's not going to take the time to invest to develop it. And so an example of what I did is I took a 15,000 square foot industrial warehouse that was in Cathedral City here outside of Palm Springs. And it was about 3 years ago when cannabis deals were very hot in our area, and everyone was investing in this green rush. And it was in a PLC zoning, which is just a designation from the city, light industrial, right? If I was able to change the underlying zoning of the building to heavy industrial, then you could do cannabis businesses, and the value of the building would be, 2 to 3 times what it was presently. So you have to go through a process with the rezone. You can't do what's called spot zoning. So you can't just like take a building and say, I want to change the zoning of this particular building. You have to change the whole area of that zoning designation. So what we did is we changed the entire zoning of the block. Long story short, took us about a year and about $150,000. But what we were able to do was change that zoning, and then get the permits to do a cannabis business, and then flip it to a cannabis investor for a profit. So even if the building doesn't make sense, or you can't do what you think, you can always just change the underlying zoning and create that additional value.
So, a lot of people go through a due diligence period, when they're attempting to acquire a property. Is that something that they can check to see if that's even possible before an acquisition?
You definitely want to check the underlying zoning of a building while you're in your due diligence to see what you can do. The process within which to change zoning is typically about, at least in my area, it's about a year. So you're not going to be able to get enough time in due diligence to go through the entire process. So what I do is I'm not really a gambler, right? But to use a poker analogy, if I have 2 kings, there might be someone with 2 aces, but I'll make the bet, right? So you do your initial due diligence to find out if it's open for the zoning. And then what I do is I purchase an option to be able to close within the period of a year, or I will release a large deposit to give me the time needed to actually do the due diligence. So you got to pay to play a bit, but within that first, 45, 60 days of due diligence, you're going to get a lot of information as to whether or not you're holding, 2-7 or 2 kings, and whether or not you should make the bet.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So just as a reminder, we're talking to Adam Gilbert. He's with The Firm Commercial. You can find him at thefirmcommercial.com, and I'll make sure to include those links in the show notes with all of the social media links. And Adam is found on all of them except for TikTok.
I'm on TikTok. I just don't produce content for it. So you can still find me and send me your best little clips.
There you go. So yeah. So another thing that I'd like to chat about too, then, is when it comes to when you're acquiring commercial, do you typically find that you're talking to the sellers directly, or are you going through a realtor?
So I'd say it's about 50-50. For me, at least. I happen to be a broker, so I have access
Sure.
to, some information as to who the sellers are. But you're really going to find the best deals off market.
Right.
And so the project that I'm working on now was, again, one of these buildings. My office was in the building next to it. And I would drive by it every day, and it was vacant for about 7 years. And there was no for sale sign, no for lease sign. It was just sitting there. And I was like, why hasn't anyone done anything with this? I put a call into the owner. Turns out he's this big property holder from, Los Angeles. And this was his redheaded stepchild. This was the property in the desert that he's just like, ugh, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to put the money into it. So that was an opportunity to, make a deal with him to be able to create the value that I was able to create.
Sure. So have you found that, like, when you acquire a commercial property, is there any differences there? Like anything you can take advantage of when you're talking to these sellers, whether it's some sort of flexibility on terms or the closing process? How does that look, especially compared to residential?
Yeah, so I'd say the biggest thing that you'll find with commercial as opposed to residential is that people who hold commercial property are typically, wealthy. They've gone through the process of either acquiring or inheriting, property.
Right.
And a lot of times, if they held it for a long time, the values have gone up so substantially that they own it outright. They bought it for two Tic Tacs and a nickel, like in 1972, right? And now it's worth
Hmm.
$3 million. It's crazy. And so one of the biggest things, if that's the case, is the ability to use seller financing. And so typically commercial financing, you have to have a very large down payment, typically 25 to 30%. And then you have to have the income coming in. So it's very hard to purchase these value add properties. But if you reach out to the seller and say, hey, seller, you own this outright, here's, if it's $1 million property, here's 250, or here's 150,000 or 200,000, and give me favorable terms so I can get this property up and running to be able to then go to a bank and get some traditional financing. That's going to be very favorable. Typically, those seller financing terms allows you to just pay interest only for the term of the seller financing, because the seller doesn't care
Hmm.
if you pay off the principal, which allows you to keep your cost basis pretty low and be able to hold the building for a longer time. That's what I did with my latest project.
Sure. How do you typically approach that topic with the seller? Like, I'm sure that there has to be some serious rapport building for them to be ready for that type of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And, it's, again, I find that the vast majority of these commercial owners, they're deal junkies. They like to do deals. They understand it. They're willing to carry paper because, hey, you want to give me a down payment. And then if you don't pay, I get to foreclose back on you and take my building back with your down payment. I'll do that deal, so
Hmm.
they're familiar with the process. And, if they're willing to sell, they're probably willing to be a little bit flexible on some of the terms.
Sure. Well, before anybody goes into this, a lot of commercial properties, of course, have pro formas and other things to analyze this property, and you're going through all of your due diligence. Spend a little time talking about what people probably wouldn't be familiar with. We
Mhm.
typically talk a lot about you're doing your due diligence and running your numbers on residential properties, but how is that different when it comes to analyzing this commercial property?
Yeah, very, very good point. So some of the key differences that you should be aware of when evaluating a commercial property is that not all leases are equal, right? And so, if I have a building and I've got 5,000 square feet and it's leased out by Walmart, and another 5,000 square feet at the same rate that's leased out by Adam's General Store, the lease with the Walmart is going to be much more valuable, right? Because it's backed by a national brand, and that they're going to pay. I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know anything about Adam's General Store. I don't know anything about Adam. I don't know if he's got two nickels to rub together. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, the length of the term. Is there a personal guarantee? is this their one location, or do they have five? Are they a good operator? You have to evaluate. It's not just about the numbers on the paper, and also the numbers on the paper might be complete bull from the broker. Basically you have to do your own analysis and look at the leases, but you have to look at those other factors within the lease itself to determine the strength and how much you're willing to put your faith behind Mr. Tenant, who is going to be responsible for paying your bills on this building, because you don't want to buy a building and have all your tenants go away and now you're carrying it, because once you write a few of those checks, they start to hurt.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So, what typically, I know it's going to be different depending on the amount of different parts of the country.
Yeah.
But one of those things that I really want to, this is going to be a pretty newbie question when it comes to
Sure.
this, is cap rate. I think there's a lot of, everybody talks about a cap rate, especially when it comes to commercial property. Whereas on a residential, you might hear cash on cash return. So can you talk a little bit, like, what's the difference between a cap rate and
yeah. So a cap rate is really just kind of like a general rule of thumb. It's like gross rent multiplier, right? It's just like
Right.
a figure that helps you kind of figure out what the risk is and what the kind of return is on any given investment, right? So going back to the last example, if I'm buying a building and the tenant is Walmart and they've got a 20-year lease, that cap rate is going to be super low because it's so secure. I know that I'm going to get that payment. And so I'm willing to take less of a return over time for that security, right? And so maybe a 2.5% cap makes sense in that. And that just means, essentially a 2.5% return on your money, not counting other factors, right? If I have that same lease with Adam's General Store, I'm going to want that at an 8 cap, because I don't know Adam, he might go out of business. And so if I'm going to take over this property, I want to be compensated with the amount of a return that's going to warrant the risk that I'm taking. And so that's really the most important thing about cap. Everyone's like, I want a 10 cap, I want an 8 cap. It's like, do you? Like that, because if you're getting that kind of cap, there's inherent risk. And so some people really want that risk. Some people, I have clients who are, I've have all these, higher cap properties, and now I'm at the end of my career and I want to now transfer it to something that's more secure that I can give to my kids because they're not experts in commercial real estate.
Right. So, I always like to give people some actionable items. So I'm gonna, before we do, I'm gonna give you the question in advance, so it gives you a few minutes to think of, a couple minutes to think about this.
Great, thanks.
So I'd like you to think of like 3 things that you wish you would have known before going into commercial, that people should probably consider, things that they could have, they can take action on if they are interested in getting into commercial real estate. But before we get to that, I want to remind everybody again that we're talking to Adam Gilbert. He's with the Firm Commercial. Head over to thefirmcommercial.com, and you can find Adam on all of the social networks. Just look for Adam Gilbert and the number 13. But so Adam, did I give you enough time?
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, what are those 3 things that they should consider before they get into real estate?
So
Commercial.
At least with commercial. So this is for all of our people who work for themselves. The number 1 is show income, because it's so easy to deduct everything and not pay any tax. But in order to qualify for these loans, you have to show income, and paying tax is the price that we pay, because these banks are not going to qualify you on these deals unless you're showing enough money that you're earning outside of these investments year after year.
Right.
So that's one that always get that. I got the restaurant owner that wants to buy a building and hasn't shown any profit in 20 years. It's like, sorry, guy, you can't do it. The second is just like try to get involved in deals. There are a lot of pitfalls within commercial real estate. And again, a lot of times because the numbers are so big, you might be pooling some other people's money together. So I don't know, volunteer your time, work for a broker, watch other people's deals, lease out a space in property management, try to just get as much on-site education as you can. And then, I mean, I got two. I don't know if I have a third.
No, that's great. I mean, those two alone is worth listening to this episode. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't emphasize especially that last one. In fact, the fella I talked to just the other day pointed that out, and it's actually kind of surprising that one of the big things that we need to remember is that we're investing in real estate investing, but before you do that, you need to invest in yourself.
Mhm.
And in one way to invest in yourself is actually spending some of that time. If you can't spend money, you spend your time finding a mentor or finding an opportunity that you can put a little sweat and equity in. If somebody's willing to trade a little bit for your time to get involved in a deal, even if it's just to shadow that person, the amount of education you will get is more than worth that time investment.
And that's exactly what I did. I found a local developer because I wanted to go into real estate development and go on that. And I met him at a Christmas party. I probably followed up with him by text once a month for a year. He finally said, all right, like, let's go get lunch. And I volunteered my time with him for about 2 years and just sat at his knee essentially and watched him do deals and negotiate and taught. And, I did some busy work for him so that he got some value out of it. But that was that was a great education to be able to feel confident to do my first deal.
Yeah, and that's a big lesson there as well, that you went to him asking how you can help versus I've actually heard of people going in and just right off the get-go asking, can you be my mentor? And, there isn't a bigger thing that you could do that to drive somebody away from you
Right.
than
Exactly.
that. You
It's like,
got
no, I'm
to find
busy.
ways to help you. Yeah. These people at that level are very busy, and the last thing they're doing is to giving you that time to be your mentor.
Mhm.
They might need some help. That's the way to approach it.
Definitely.
But it is definitely a mindset thing. I think there's a lot of, and you and I probably could spend a whole episode just talking about mindset. So we probably shouldn't open that can of worms, but
Another time.
another time. Well, I really appreciate your time, Adam. This was great. You kind of gave everybody a kind of 101 on commercial real estate investing. And before I let you go, is there a question you wished I would have asked you here tonight?
That's a really good question. No, I think, we got a nice little basis here. Again, I try to give tips on my social media about little things that you should be thinking about. So feel free to follow me. And, if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out via DM.
No, that's awesome. So again, thank you. And we'll talk to you again sometime.
Thanks so much, Jack.